The Poetic and Prophetic books for Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon. These two books have probably occasioned more trouble to biblical students than any other parts of the Bible. The interpretations which have been given of them have been widely diverse, and there has been no general agreement as to the main design of either. Still, they contain many lofty sentiments and important truths which could not well be spared from the treasury of religious thought. Well, certain books were spared that didn't have any weaker of a theological, a historical, scientific, philosophical claim to truth. There wasn't any more reason there to include or exclude certain ones. Some there was, but the impression given by the opening verse of the book of Ecclesiastes and by certain passages in it is that it was written by Solomon. There are also several allusions to the character and condition of the person represented by the writer, which seem to corroborate this impression, but there are several indications which point to a later authorship. The style is not that of Solomon's other writings, nor one which corresponds with the age of Solomon. Yeah, none of them were, except there's probably like one statement of many books. There were of books there are no end, but the Scripture of God or something like that. Being the supreme. It seems to belong to a period of less culture and refinement. Well, it depends on what language you look at things. The least refined book in the whole Bible is the book of Revelations. But you read in the King James, it sounds better than pretty much anything you're going to find in the King James. It is not improbable that it was, the literary quality. It is not improbable that it was written about 3 or 4 centuries after the time of Solomon by some writer who, with a legitimate and proper motive, simply personated that famous king whose name among the Jews was almost a synonym, not only for wisdom, but for all that is great in humanity. Well, you can say that about every book in the Bible. At least until you get to the Pauline part. And then the Gospels, well, it wasn't the people of the, during or before Paul. It was after. The object also may have been to set forth the experience of this great man as illustrating the result of successful worldliness and self-gratification as contrasted with the outcome of the higher wisdom implied in a godly life. The earlier and larger part of the book is chiefly occupied with a gloomy view of life, often of a morbid character, and sometimes bordering on the contemptuous. It is enigmatical and abounds in riddles and paradoxes. It is also a mysterious and unsatisfactory thing. The keynote and the dismal refrain is, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." But even here are occasional rifts in the cloud, broad gleams of a great reconciling truth, which yet somehow is connected with a higher style and better philosophy of human life. This comes out clear and satisfactory in the closing chapters. There it appears that man was made not for this world alone, and not for selfish achievements or gratification, but with reference to some great plans of God for him. By him, we don't mean that God's male. It's just the pronoun, which are to be realized by obedience and devotion to the divine service. This, then, is apparently the scope of the book, the utter vanity and unprofitableness of human life insofar as it consists in the mere gathering of worldly wealth, wisdom, or power, the pursuit of earthly pleasure. This, because it brings more pain and sorrow than gratification and involves more evil than good. Having thus dwelt at length on this experience of a mere worldly man also, nevertheless, in this instance, arises occasionally above his worldliness, the writer sets forth a better style of life, a life of obedience to God, and trust in his overruling and directing power and wisdom, the satisfaction in the consciousness of right doing, a feeling that out of all the apparent evil in the world will come untold good to the obedient soul. There is not the bright and vivid conception of the future life which we find in the New Testament. Or you could say there's a stronger one, but there's not the vicarious atonement stuff. But there is a faith which anticipates some glory yet to be revealed. The Song of Solomon has given rise to a still larger variety of opinions than Ecclesiastes. The divergency of views has also been larger and less reconcilable. It is called, in the title, the Song of Songs, implying the superlative estimation in which it was held when it was first written. The most probable theory concerning it is that it is a eclogue, or idyll, a song of loves, representing now in dialogue and now in monologue, the love of a youth and maiden. Probably preserved because there were religious teachings in the middle of it, you could see, and they get punished for for their violations, don't they? These express their mutual affection in the minute and sensuous imagery usual among Orientals, but uncommon among modern and Western nations. Many think it to have been written to celebrate the nuptials of Solomon and Pharaoh's daughter, and not a few of the allusions give force to this hypothesis. It is supposed to have a spiritual significance, referring primarily to God in relation to his people, Israel, and ultimately to Christ and his church. Really stretching it for some of those bits at the very least. The latter relationship is frequently prominent in the New Testament. See Mark 9:15, John 3:29, 2 Corinthians 11:2, 2 Corinthians 11:2, Revelation 19 verse 7, 21 verse 2, etc. Well, kind of basically spanning the whole thing. Why those in particular? There have been many passages of exquisite poetry, as well as many which are applicable to the highest and purest spiritual experience. What peculiarities in common have these two books? What value do they both contain? And particularly with this series, I'll answer questions in the comments here. What is the first impression concerning the authorship of Ecclesiastes? Mention some passages in which this is indicated. Chapter 1, 1 through 12, 13, chapter 2, 4 through 10. The more recent opinion concerning its authorship and the time in which it was written. Was there any moral impropriety and the writers personating Solomon. What was there in Solomon's character and general reputation which would naturally suggest the use of his name in such a representation? What appears to have been the general design or object of the book, and what are its moral teachings? How does the former part regard life? What view is presented in the latter part? What is the great refrain of the former part? 1, 2, 2, 26, etc. On what supposition concerning human life is this true? Do you think that to a merely worldly and selfish man, there is as much of good as evil in this world? What is the final summing up of the whole matter? 12:13. What reference to a future judgment do you find? 11:9 and 12:14. Give the substance of the exhortation in the first part of the last chapter. What is meant by the keeper of the house? Those that look out of the windows, the grinders, the almond tree. Towards what does the whole imagery apply? The Song of Solomon. What strong impression in the title of this book? And what does it impart? Who is personated as the writer and one of the principal actors? What are the general character and style of the book? Is it number 5 that has a prophecy about the Muhammad? So in the plural, anyways. To what higher purpose is it supposed to relate? And what application is made of many passages in it? Where do we find this relationship expressed in the New Testament? What passage is often used to figure the relation of the saved soul to Christ? See 2, 3, and 4. The beauty and glory of the church. See 6, 4, and 10. How is the advent of spring described? 2, 11, and 12. The strength of love. 8, 7. And church. Ecclesia is different than church, so you can say that nowhere does it have Jesus during his life say anything in support of church. So how are we making these conclusions from what they call the Old Testament?